Shmuz 168 on Emunah. Now, again, the Hakta Shmuz, when done live, is actually an interactive process. We'll go through the steps. But I'd like to record this to give you a sense of how it functions and hopefully give you a better grip on what the Shmuz actually accomplishes. So, in the system, invariably the Shmuz opens up with a Chazal. The Chazal, again, is that self-contained unit that we take right from the Gemara. In this case, in Shmuz number 168, it was a story with Rav Ashi. The story in the Chazal basically revolved around the following issue. The Mishnah in Sanhedrin says there are three kings who have no chelik, no portion in the world to come. Rav Ashi was just about up to that Gemara. That day, right before he began that Mishnah, he stopped the shir and said, tomorrow we'll discuss our friends, our Chaverim. That night in a dream, Menashe comes to him and says, you call me your friend. Let me ask you a halachic question. When Menashe asked that question to Rav Ashi was unable to answer it. When he was unable to answer it, quickly Rav Ashi understood that Menashe was even superior, greater than he. Rav Ashi said, tell me the answer to that question. Menashe told him the answer, and then Rav Ashi asked the following question. If you're so wise, how is it that you served the Avodah Zarah? How is it that you worshipped idols? To which Menashe answered simply, had you been alive in my generation, you would have picked up the cloak of your robe to run after Avodah Zarah. The next day in Shir, Rav Ashi said, let us begin with our teachers, referring to Menashe as his Rebbe. Now that's the Chazal. The question on the Chazal here was quite simple. And that was that typically we understand two broad categories of sins. Sins of thought and sins of the heart. Don't follow your passions, your drives, and after your eyes. Excuse me, I said that the opposite. Means do not follow sins of your mind, that we understand as minus apikorsis. Means refers to sins of passion, of drive, of taiva. Now, because we assume that sins of belief, sins of thought, are separate than sins of drive and desire, the question that comes out on this Gemara really is quite simple. And that is that Rav Ashi said to Menashe that how could you have possibly followed Avodah Zarah? You're a brilliant man. You can only serve Avodah Zarah if you believe in it. If you believe that Zeus, Mercury, the sun, has various powers, then you could worship them. But if you're an intelligent man, you quickly understand that that's fallacious. It's ridiculous. You're a brilliant man. How could you have made that mistake? Now again, that question was that since Avodah Zarah is a sin of belief, a sin of the heart, how could Menashe have said to Rav Ashi that you too would have done the same, you would have believed also had you been alive in my generation? It seems to be that that's a sin of belief which would not be affected by your heart. Even if Rav Ashi was alive in that generation, he should have been cool, dispassionate, and not believed in Avodah Zarah. Now, that being the question, the perspective that that question is based on would become clear as we work through the steps. The first step was to bring a question from Rav Elchanan. Rav Elchanan wants to be asked that the Rambam says there's an obligation upon every Jew to believe in HaShem. Rav Elchanan's question is, that makes no sense. Because how can you obligate a 13-year-old boy to believe in HaShem when the greatest minds in history sometimes couldn't fathom that concept? Aristotle didn't understand that. So how could the Torah obligate a mere boy to understand that which Aristotle didn't understand? The answer to that, says Rabbi Chanan, is that the heart is pulls the mind. Meaning, the mind is not independent of the heart is not independent of the mind. The two pull one on the other. We gave an example of that. The fellow who was enamored with this young woman, and because of that was willing to believe that she'll change. She'll change. Yes, she's very expensive to keep. Yes, she's bratty. Yes, she's a difficult person, but she'll change. Now, if you would have asked him about somebody else, would you believe if you saw such a picture of a person in any other person, would you believe that they'll change? Would you risk it? Of course not, because he's an intelligent, understanding person. The reason why he believed that she would change is because she was attractive, he was enamored with her, he was gone, and his seichel, his intellect, was blinded. His heart pulled his mind. And what he wanted greatly shaped what he believed. And this concept that what we want changes what we believe in. My desires can shape my understanding is Rabbi Chanan's answer to the question. He says, how is it that the Torah can obligate a 13-year-old boy in this mitzvah? The answer is the human mind immediately will perceive wisdom, plan and purpose in this creation. If a person looks in any aspect of this world, whether it be a flower, whether it be a tree, whether it be a bird, whether it be an elephant, any aspect of this world shows such wisdom that it's impossible for there to be any other answer but a creator. How is it that many intelligent thinking people can study the world and not reach that conclusion? The answer is their heart pulls their mind. I don't want to believe in God. I'd be much more comfortable without a God in this world, because if there's a God, there are many things I can't do, many things I'll have to do. I just don't want that piece of it. So the starting perspective is there's no God. Now that we got that clear, we'll try to find the next best answer. But the starting bias is I don't want to believe in God. Since I do not want to believe in God, therefore I will not accept. My desires, my heart greatly shapes the way I think. That concept is Rav Elchonen's answer to the question, and that brings us to one step forward towards answering our question. However, we need one more step. And the next step that we need is to understand how passions work, how taiva works. And we pointed out that taiva is not set. Taiva can increase or decrease. Passion, drives, desires have various stages. They could have highs, they could have lows. For instance, in the animal kingdom in the spring, there's a much greater increase of taiva. The animals will have a tremendous desire to mate. That same animal in the wintertime may not mate at all, or certainly will not have that same burning desire. But in the springtime, there's a almost burning desire within them. Almost nothing will contain them, because the taiva has increased, the desire has increased. So too, there could be places that cause a greater desire. The Chazal, the Medrash Tanchuma mentions Shittim. Additionally, a guess might be that San Francisco might be an application of that. But the point being that taiva can be increased or decreased. Now that concept is very important for us to answer a different question that we asked in the Shmuz. And that different question was based on an earlier Shmuz. In Shmuz number 42, Satan out of the box, we dealt with the following question. And that is, the Chazal tell us, Mishe Godol Michavero, Yitzro Gadol Mechavero. One who's greater than his friend, his Yetzer Hara, his evil inclination, is greater than his friend. Now that seems to be counterintuitive. Why? Because we know that you and I start with a Nefesh HaBahami, Nefesh HaSichli in balance. As my Nefesh HaBahami becomes weaker and weaker, my Nefesh HaSichli becomes stronger and stronger. The two are in constant competition. The two are in constant flux. So if in fact a person controls their nature, and their Nefesh HaSichli becomes strong, and the Nefesh HaBahami becomes weaker and weaker. As it becomes weaker, Misha Gadol Michaver, one who's greater than his friend, surely his Yetzer should be weaker, should be less than his friend. Yet Chazal are telling us the exact opposite. Now, this question that we answered in Shmuz 42, something out of the box, the basic answer is that Rabbi Salam tells us that there are two separate manifestations of the Yetzer Hara. There's an internal evil inclination and an external. The internal means quite simply the drives, appetites, the Nefesh HaBahami. The external is the Satan. The Satan is an external Yetzer Hara. He's a malach, he's on the job 24/7, and he has a very particular purpose in creation. And in our situation, the purpose really is quite simple. Let's imagine we have a man who at the beginning of his life starts at a 50-50. He starts in even balance. As he begins to do what's right, his Nefesh HaSichli becomes stronger and stronger. His Nefesh HaBahami becomes weaker and weaker. He might start at a 50-50, but very shortly he may be a 60-40, and then a 70-30, 80-20, 90-10. He may get to a point where 95% of the I, the totality of him, is governed by his seicha, by his wisdom, and the Nefesh HaBahami is but a mere 5%, a very weak pull. You and I would assume that that's a great state of being. The man has accomplished his mission on this earth. Let him live on that way in perfection for the rest of his days, and everything's fine and dandy. However, Chazal explained to us that really it's quite the opposite. The reason that Hashem created us was to grow. Growth, almost by definition in the human condition, is predicated by challenge. What that means in plain, simple language is I have a desire, and I decide that I'm the master of the ship. I want something, but I resist it. I need it, but I hold back. That fight, that battleground is the essence of life, because that's the essence of growth. There's a part of me pulling, and there's a part of me that says, no, I'm in charge. By making the right decisions, by resisting, that's the growth of the human. However, if a man gets to the point where he's 95% Nefesh HaSichli, powerful seichel, very, very weak Nefesh HaBahami, there's almost no challenge. Every situation he recognizes for its true purpose, Every mitzvah he recognizes is helpful to him, beneficial to him. Every aveira he recognizes is damaging to him. Therefore, he effectively loses bechira. He effectively loses free will. In theory, he has free will, but much like a malach has free will, but would never do something damaging to itself, hence really in an effective manner doesn't have free will, so too if a person has total clarity of thought, if his mind really wins out over his nefesh habahami, there's very little challenge, hence very little reason for him to exist. Therefore, Hashem gave the permission to the Satan in that situation to act with greater force. The way to think of it is as follows. Typically, if the taiva in a given person is from a scale of 1 to 100 begins at a set point of 10. So imagine for a minute that our friend, when he was 50-50, had a taiva and a set point of 10, and that's where he started. Now, because he grew and got to the point where he's 95% nefesh sichli, 5% nefesh bahami, the Satan has to bring an even playing field. What the Satan will do is increase the taiva. Think of it almost like a magnet. If you have a piece of steel and you add a little bit of electricity to it, it becomes powerful. Add a little bit more current to it, it becomes more powerful. More current, more power, more power, more power, more current. If you go to a junkyard, you'll see an entire car being picked up off the ground because of electromagnet above it that's way up high, but it's such a powerful force that it can literally lift up an entire 4,000 pound car. So if the taiva starts at a set point of 10, the Satan is allowed to increase it, so it goes to 10, to 20, to 30, to 40, until there's back to an even balance. Until he's back to the point where he's on even keel, and he's back with a real desire, a real hunger, and he's now back in balance. So when Chazal say Misha Gadol Mechaveru Yitzro Gadol, what that means is, because he grew so much, the Satan is allowed to add more current to his taiva, so that his taiva is stronger, so that it balances out equally against his now brilliant seichel. As I said, and I've said it before, it bears repeating, we always say the expression, oh, if only I had a gadol yetzirah, if only I had the evil inclination of great people. If you or I had the yetzirah of Moshe Feinstein, we'd be serial killers. Why? Because if you can imagine that electromagnet, such a powerful force, pulling and pulling, you and I would be putty in its hands. That's in fact in Shmuz 42 what happened with David Melech. And that's in fact what Chazal mean, Misha Gadol Mechaver, one who's greater than his friend, Yitzro Gadol, his Yetzirah is greater. And I believe that with these concepts, we now have a different perspective, and with that perspective, we can answer the question. The question that we asked was that Menashe said to Rav Ashi, had you been alive in my day, you would have run after Avodah Zarah. Now that question was based on the following perspective. We assumed that the heart and the mind are separate. What Rav Ashi was being challenged with was a sin of belief. He didn't believe in Avodah Zarah. No matter what generation he lived in, he wouldn't believe in Avodah Zarah because it's foolish. So how could Menashe say to him, had you been alive in my generation, you too would have believed in Avodah Zarah? And the answer is, that, as the Mashal explains, that in that generation where Menashe lived was before the Anshe Knesset Agdola destroyed the appetite, the hunger for Avodah Zarah. Back in the time of the Beis HaMikdash, there was actually a lust, a desire, a taiva to serve Avodah Zarah. And because of that, because the taiva was much greater, if you or I were alive in that generation, we would have been pulled towards it. And the heart would have pulled the mind. We would have walked past a totem pole or Baal Pa'or or one of the various Avodah Zarahs, and we would have looked at it and said, wow, I wish I could serve it. What a beautiful Avodah Zarah. I wish I could be there. Unfortunately, I can't. The Torah prevents me. But because we would have been pulled, that drive, that appetite would have shifted our mind. What we want is what we begin believing in, that would have shaped our thought process. We would have believed in it to some extent. We would have seen the power of Zeus, the power of the sun, the power of various forces, and our desires would have caused us to believe in it. And the real chiddush over here is twofold. Number one, that again, taiva can increase or decrease, that there aren't one set point, but rather various factors can change it, whether it be seasonally in the animal kingdom, by location in our own world. But here, based on a person's madrega, on his spiritual level, the Satan is allowed to increase it or decrease it. In the situation, of Rav Ashi and Menashe, the point being, Had Rav Ashi been alive in the time of Menashe, there would have been a great increase in his desire for Avodah Zarah. It would not have been the same as now. Now it's nothing. Who cares? Who's interested? But then it was almost like an electromagnet towards serving idols. That greater power, that greater drive, hunger, would have shifted not just his heart, not just what he wanted, but that would have shifted his belief system, because the heart pulls the mind, much like our friend who saw that girl and was attracted to her, therefore believed she could change. So too Rav Ashi would have been pulled, would have desired it, that would have shifted his mindset, and in some level he would have believed in it. Now, that's the answer to the kasha. The question was, Rav Ashi, how could he be pulled after it? The answer is because taiva increases. Additionally, there's a direct relationship between desires and the heart. Therefore, had Rav Ashi been alive there, there would have been greater pull. Therefore, he would have believed in it. Now, the application of this concept, I think, is very straightforward. And the application is, in our world, anytime you see intelligent, learned, thought-out people discussing evolution in a very serious manner. And the example we gave in this particular shmuz was blood clotting, but really, the truth be told, it's any aspect of nature, any aspect of science, any part of the world. If you have an intelligent, rational person who looks at it, studies it, and not just that, can oftentimes tell you things you never even dreamt of. He could tell you different aspects and levels and things that you never imagined, and then he could say the words, well, I guess it evolved. Granted, it's much more complicated than an NFL playbook, but the clotting system, the 13 immediate factors, the 20 overall factors involved in the whole process, whatever, we just got lucky, a lucky roll of the cosmic dice. Sir, that's ridiculous. That's ludicrous. It makes no sense. The answer is because he doesn't want to believe in God. That is out of the picture. Once God is out, now let's deal with it rationally. But you see, his mind is being pulled by his heart. If he would stop the busyness, stop the static, ask himself one thing: what do I honestly see? Well, but if I see it, I'm going to have to admit to God, and I don't want. No, forget that. Forget the consequences. Forget your agenda. Answer one simple question: what does your mind tell you? Any human being who would answer that question objectively, dispassionately, would immediately see a creator. The reality is that I'm pulled. I desire. I don't want to see a God. Therefore, it shapes my mindset, like that young man who now believed the girl can change, like Rav Ashi, who would have been influenced by the generation. That's what we witness when we see scientists, learned people who, again, see the wisdom and deny it. And that's the application of this concept. And the truth be told, it has an application in our own life in terms of all of our belief systems and how we approach HASHEM. Thank you.